Simon Jenkins, I want to bring into the conversation. The issue that question was premised on the notion that America's image has always rested on its adherence to the rule of law, and that the years of the Bush administration have, to some degree, seen to have been a disintegration of the value of the Constitution. With Barack Obama now taking over, does the fact that he has this terrible image with which to compare himself give him a boost? Or does the fact that American leadership has been so diminished, respect for America has been so diminished, give him a terrible starting point?
Well, I think the origin of this whole part of the discussion is the response to 9/11. 9/11 was the starting point of almost everything that we've been talking about. And I think many people in Europe, and indeed around the world, simply feel that America overreacted. And so did Britain, I may say. So this is not something peculiar to America. It was a feeling that some new force had been unleashed on the world, to which we had to respond by restricting our normal, customary defenses of liberty. Now, I'm a libertarian, and I've always felt that was simply unnecessary. The reaction was an overreaction. The consequence of it, however, is that we have, in a sense, played the terrorist game. We've done what they wanted us to do, which was restrict our liberties, curb our liberties, behave in a certain way towards other states and other peoples that we would not normally have done before.
But I've heard Bill Kristol say, and Bill, let me bring you into this, I've heard you say that when it comes to terrorism, rather than playing the terrorist game, that the president has succeeded in putting the terrorists on the run, which is why 9/11 was the only incident in this city.
Would that they were on the run.
Bill Kristol?
Well, they haven't been very successful here, and they haven't been very successful in Western Europe, and they've actually not been very successful elsewhere. Al-Qaeda has been a losing proposition for the last several years. There remains a huge problem of a jihadist impulse in the Islamic world, which is unfortunately abetted by certain states. But I think Bush has done a very good job of making terror a losing proposition, which is the most important thing he could have done, taken away their momentum, which, again, if we had not gone into Iraq and if we had lost in Iraq, that would have been the single most disastrous result. Bush turned that around. But I just don't buy this premise that we've radically curbed civil liberties. Bush has done less after the 9/11 attack than any other president has done. Much, much less. He's been much more responsible than Franklin Roosevelt was after we were attacked in World War II. He's been much more solicitous of civil liberties than, if I might say, John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson were, and Richard Nixon were during Vietnam. We've had, some controversial calls and some tough calls. There were a couple of overreactions, which the Bush administration itself walked back. Jack Goldsmith and Attorney General Mukasey have, I think, corrected some slight, some controversial interpretations that probably went too far.
Yeah.
Jacob Weisberg.
Jack Goldsmith was drummed out of the Bush administration for challenging those decisions. The torture
That's
memos.
not true. He changed the actual Office of Legal Counsel policy, and Attorney General Mukasey is leaving the Bush legal program intact and I think totally defensible, and it will not be changed much by Barack Obama.
If you read Goldsmith's book, he was driven out more or less. But the point is, I'm amazed by. I appreciate how open-minded you are about some of these issues, but on the civil liberties issues. You're amazingly cavalier. Closing Guantanamo is no big deal. We have them here, we have them there. Torture, you won't second-guess the decisions. I mean, these go to the heart of the questions about the rule of law and the Constitution, and the question of whether terrorist suspects...
Okay, well, what is the question?
The question...
Bush has lost fewer court decisions than almost any president has. He lost 2 5-4 decisions. Maybe the 5 were right. Maybe Bush shouldn't have gone quite as far as he did in some of the claims he made about Guantanamo. But we are going to have to detain people. We are not going to be able to provide them all civil trials. I do not believe that is a way you can deal with terrorists captured on the battlefield.
Why can't you deal with them with military trials? We have an existing system of military justice. No, he set up his own alternate system. We already had a system of military justice. He decided he needed his own.
He signed legislation that Congress passed in 2005 and 2006.
Karl Rove, let's bring in Karl Rove. And I just want to say it's fine to register your reaction to this with applause. I heard it for Jacob. I haven't heard it for Bill Kristol. I mean, is there a sense of support for Bill Kristol's argument?
No.
Please.
Karl Rove.
Don't be doing that again, John. We lost 65-17. Come on, man. I'm delighted that we did better.
I was trying to get the 17
side.
to applause here.
You know, we got 8% of the vote in one of the precincts up here. I mean, come on, man. Come on. All right, look. It's clever to suggest that we ought to have the style of courtroom justice we provide to our military and provide that for enemy combatants. We shouldn't. That's what we've attempted to do in the military justice system, is to the greatest possible degree possible duplicate our civil justice system? And are you suggesting that we ought to Mirandize these people and keep a chain of evidence and all the other things that we normally do in both military and civilian courts for terrorists?
Not at all. And people have far fewer rights under the military system, but the point is, under your system, they have no rights. The prisoners at Guantanamo were originally denied access to a lawyer. We couldn't even find out who was there. And the original claim by the Bush administration was that this applied to citizens as well as non-citizens. So if the Bush administration decided that you were suspected of terrorism, you could be held indefinitely without a lawyer, without a hearing, without a trial. You know, I'm not saying that these prisoners...
With all due respect, you're making it sound like everybody on the Upper West Side needs to worry about being sent to the re-education camps in Texas. And in reality, what it was focused at is if we picked up a U.S. citizen who was a terrorist on a battlefield abroad, would we subject them to U.S. law, or would we treat them as a terrorist?
But here's what you slipped in. If we picked up someone who's a terrorist, what if they happen not to be a terrorist? Some of these people have been acquitted.
Yeah. And the system has a process of review in which that determination can be made.
In the big picture, look, the fact is, in the big picture...
Name one guy you're worried about. Name one guy you're worried about.
No, that's exactly
you worried
right.
about John Lynn? You worried about him? What person
was
are
the
you
Bush
worried
administration
about?
bad at explaining their policies, especially abroad? Yes. Did people abroad take a kind of cavalier and really hypocritical sense of, of pleasure in decrying those ridiculous Americans with all this stuff, when they themselves, of course, as you know well, in continental Europe, treat their own citizens with many less rights, are much nastier to their own minorities. Bush went out of his way, and with great success, to say this is not a war on Islam, we need to respect everyone's rights. He was incredibly solicitous, as he should have been, of Muslim Americans. We have Muslim Americans here have a much fairer and more equal playing field than Muslims do in most of these wonderful European countries that sit around having heart attacks. About 200 people held at Guantanamo. And let's just talk. Bush made 2 Supreme Court appointments. They were incredibly highly qualified, Alito and Roberts. 61 appointments to federal courts. Whatever, they were conservative, of course, as Obama's will be liberal. Extremely highly qualified judges. He made a couple of mistakes, I think, in his appointments out of excessive loyalty, perhaps with Alberto Gonzalez, but the fact is Ashcroft was a serious attorney general, and then he brought in Mukasey, and he is leaving an intact and functioning legal system which we can be proud of, given the threats we're facing.
Simon Jenkins.
What I think is extraordinary to people abroad is that those of us who are enthusiasts for America and American liberties cannot see why you needed to do these things. You will never persuade the outside world that you have not restricted liberty in America. You will never persuade them that you have not taken out Muslims as a particular group, and you'll never persuade them that you really needed to do these things.
What have we done to Muslims in America? What has happened?
Arrested them.
We've arrested Muslims in America?
And incarcerated them without trial.
We've incarcerated Muslims in America without trial?
Round it up. Name one instance.
But the lobbyists belabor me all day with lists of people who have vanished.
This is on the border of lunacy, with all due respect.
But you didn't need to do it. You didn't need to do it.
We didn't do it.
All right, let's come back to some questions.
You didn't need
I see down in the front row.
You've got the world believing America is a less robust place than it really is.
Now, what part of the world is that? Is that China and India? Do they have? I'm serious. Let's talk about the world. The world turns out to be a certain class of liberal elites in Western Europe. Not all of Western Europe. It does. It does. Is America unpopular? Has anyone here been? Is America unpopular in East Asia? Is America unpopular? Is Bush's policy towards China been terrible in terms of the Chinese views? India is a great success story, a rather important, huge democracy for Bush. Even in Western Europe, when Bush took over, there were rather anti-American prime ministers, democratically elected, obviously, in France and in Germany, or at least skeptical of America. Then Merkel wins in Germany, and Sarkozy wins in France. If America's image is so ruined, if they just can't stand America, why did they elect the more pro-American candidate in both of those races?
I want to go to questions.